sort of really try to get crystal clear on what it is that you wish was different about your life. Get clear on what it is that you wish was different, and also get clear on what it is that you wish could be. And then don't limit yourself, right? Like, you have to say, it's possible for me to be happier. It's possible for me to have more of what I want in this world and still accomplish what I want.
Welcome, everyone, to the Road Less Traveled Show. This is a show about people that were successful in a previous career and left that career to go down a different path. I'm your co-host, Richard Coyne.
And I'm your co-host, Bill Zahller.
On today's show, we're so pleased to have Sujata Shyam with us today. Suja, welcome.
Thank you so much, Bill and Richard. So great to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you again for being on the Road Less Traveled Show. To begin with, can you tell us a little bit about your background, what your initial career was, and how long you were in that line of work?
Yeah, for sure. So I started out after business school, actually in the multifamily space, but I worked for institutions. So I worked for institutional equity as an underwriter, meaning I was analyzing multifamily transactions and putting together, large spreadsheets and 80-page documents to have our investment committee review those documents and approve the investment. So I kind of come from this institutional background. And at the time, I didn't realize that private individuals could also do syndications because at the time, all of our investors were other institutions like pension funds and life insurance companies and other banks. And they were participating at the, $1 to $5 million level, and we were syndicating those funds. So when I found out that you could actually participate in real estate syndications as an individual, it was just a really wonderful learning because I realized I had a pretty significant background in the space and was excited to bring that investing model to my peers and people that I know in my network.
Excellent. And then what did you transition into as you got into the private syndication?
Yeah. So, as your show title alludes to, the Road Less Traveled, there were many, many steps that happen. And I'm happy to go over them because I think it's helpful for people. Yeah, so even before I started working at the institutions, during my business school career was when I really first started investing in real estate. And what I did was I was one of those people who started investing in real estate with no money. I used my student loans to purchase my first investment property when I was in graduate school. And what that means is, you get tuition loans. I didn't have any tuition loans, thankfully, but I had living loans. And those living loans, I used those to purchase my first investment property because there's no restrictions on them. And as a MBA student, you can't necessarily get a loan for anything because you don't have income, et cetera. Right. And so that was just one of the things that I did first off. And it was kind of like I partnered up with a friend and we went to, we decided, okay, this is what we want to do. We want to flip a house. We tried to create like sort of a distinct project and we're like, we're going to flip a house. That's how we're going to start. And then we went to a real estate boot camp, knowing that we didn't want to buy into any of the higher level coaching, but we just wanted to get some basic education. And we got some basic education and we're able to apply those tools. So we just did driving for dollars, which is when you drive around a neighborhood and look for a house that you want to buy. And that actually worked. I was surprised it did because, the houses that we were seeing were like totally burnt out and windows blown out. And it was just very overwhelming for me. I was like, I don't know how to fix those problems. I've barely swung a hammer in my life. But then we ended up finding a place that was for sale by owner. It was a cosmetic fixer and we flipped that house with our own sweat equity. And we did hire some subs, but we spent, 8 weeks of our lives. I was going to school at night, working on the house during the day. They were long days, but by the end of it, we had a house that we could rent out or sell. And anyway, so we ended up renting that house out for 5 years and then selling it for 5 times what we purchased it for. And that was all with, I didn't have any substantial savings, right? Like I was a graduate school student. So it's just one of those stories that I think is helpful to people to just remember that there are no excuses, right? There are obstacles, but no excuses. You've got to find a way to get started.
That's so true. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that should have solidified it for you with the 5X return on that.
Yeah, totally. Yes. I mean, it was a big win. And I will say the one thing that I will say that I didn't do was after we started that project and renovated it, then I started working for the financial institutions, and I kind of stopped doing side hustles, right? Like I just focused on my career. And that was a mistake. I mean, granted, like it's been a long time, but if I had just kept going and like putting that extra effort into building a side hustle, figuring out a way to buy real estate. I mean, I had a limiting belief at that time that, okay, I've just moved from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Portland, Oregon. Real estate's a lot more expensive here. And so I just didn't try, or I didn't really put the effort towards it that I needed to. It's okay, but it just delayed my progress as an entrepreneur. Just because you have one big win doesn't mean that you can stop, right? Like you have to keep going. And it's when you keep putting effort forth every single day, or at least consistently over time, that's when you really start to see these big changes in your life.
Right. Absolutely. And what did you transition into then after that first? What was your next real estate deal and how you started growing on that path?
Yeah. So the next thing I did once I was working at the institutions was I ended up house hacking. I didn't know that term at the time, and I didn't really know that this was a critical step for me in my real estate journey, but it was. And so house hacking is when you purchase a house to live in. It can be a duplex. It can be a single family house with a basement. It can be a house where you rent out rooms to roommates. And so then you get your tenants to pay for the mortgage so that when you buy your first property, you actually have a cash flowing property or a lot lower expenses, depending on the numbers. And so my first house, my dad had purchased rental properties when I was a kid. At some point, he decided he just didn't like stock market investing, and he preferred to just put his money into real estate. But he bought real estate in 1989, rental properties, and interest rates were really high. And he actually was negative cash flowing on those deals when I was a little kid. And, that was tight times for our family, right? Like my parents were earlier in their career, and now they have these 3 mortgages that weren't even our house that were actually requiring them to put cash. So he had always told me a house is a liability before it's an asset. And that lesson was so important because it made like, I didn't buy the most expensive house I could buy. When my realtor said like, well, what's your salary? And then I'm like, well, it's this. And I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, well, you can buy pretty much anything. And I said, oh, but I didn't want to, right? Like I wanted to buy a modest house because my dad had told me a house is a liability before it's an asset. So that's, I think, a really critical lesson, to live below your means while you're building up wealth, right? And so I bought this house and I knew I didn't want to pay much in my mortgage. And so I rented out rooms to my friends, and that was how I started. And I actually had a cash flowing property within a month of owning the property.
Nice.
And it was a great house in a great neighborhood. And, there's a lot more to that story. But one funny thing that happened, I will say, in relation to this house hack, is that my boss at the time, he's a great guy, and, I love him to death. But one of the things he said to me was, and I was saying, hey, thank you so much for giving me some extra time and flexibility in my schedule while I've closed my house and, painted the walls and all this stuff. Like, it's just been really helpful. And he said to me, no problem. I got you right where I want you. Now you have a mortgage. You have to work. And I just was blown away when he said that. I did not even know what to make of it. And then I thought about it more, and I realized, because in my mind, I had to work. Like, that was just part of what I was taught, right? Like, you work hard for your money. And I was not taught to get your money to work hard for you. At least not like in the ways that you actually can make that happen. So when my boss said that, what I realized is he thought that A, he was paying me too much, and that B, or he was paying me enough that I could just work for a while and then quit and just have fun and live off of my savings, which is a really bold thing to do. And I was a good little student, I never would have dreamed of just goofing off after making a lot of money. That's just not what I would have done, but that's what maybe he would have considered. Right. And so it just was this mindset moment for me. I was like, wow. And the other thing that it showed me was that he said, you don't have to work. Right. And so it's like, to me, what that showed me was that you have, like, people don't actually want to work. Right. And anyways, I filed that away in the back of my brain, and I just kept grinding away at work. And it wasn't until later that I realized that I didn't actually have to work. So, yeah, and learn that lesson for myself. So that kind of brings me to the next part of the story, which is when, my company went through a merger, and it was kind of like a pretty serious takeover. And my bosses weren't used to having bosses themselves. And basically it failed. It took a while for that to all unwind. But then we were left with our office closing, and I would have had to move across the country to stay with the company. And I didn't want to do that. I wasn't actually thriving in that job as much as, even though I did very well in it, I just didn't do well in the corporate environment. I just wasn't thriving on the inside. Like, it looked good. Everything looked good from the outside, but on the inside, I just wasn't happy. And so we went through a merger. I would have had to move across country. I decided not to do that. And instead I just, I got laid off. And that was a really special and hard moment, because it wasn't just the layoff, but also I had a couple other difficult things that happened to me. And at that point, my partner and I at the time, we broke up. And then also I had an accident. And so I actually had to have a surgery. And so just all these things happen. When it rains, it pours. And it was the hardest time in my life, but it was also the most transformative time in my life, because it was literally like everything burned to the ground, and then I just had to rebuild. And it was wonderful. So my friends encouraged me to travel. So I ended up traveling for quite a long time. And then that kind of helped me reset my internal compass of, like, where is it that I want to go in my life? Right. So after traveling the world for 18 months, I decided that I needed to be an entrepreneur, and that I didn't want to go back to a regular office job, because that just, some people that works for, but for me and my personality, I don't really want that kind of routine life. I don't really like being told what to do. I don't really like being told how I can spend my time. So, maybe I have issues with authority, or maybe I'm just meant to be an entrepreneur. I don't know. But so that's when I decided to be an entrepreneur.
That's right.
Well, good for you. So now you've left that organization you're no longer with. And what is it you do now? What is your company now?
Yeah, totally. So now I am, so from that point on, I just decided to be an entrepreneur, and I did a few things before. So, one thing I discovered as I was going through this process, that I have some limiting beliefs I had some back then about real estate. And so, because I was trying everything under the sun to be an entrepreneur except real estate, even though I had worked in real estate, even though I had flipped a house and house hacked and had a decent track record so far of building income streams through real estate. And analyzing real estate at a high level. So, but I had some limiting beliefs. So I was trying everything under the sun. And then I basically decided, at some point, I kind of realized that, I was trying to do too much and it wasn't really working. And I decided to do some deeper work. And I uncovered these limiting beliefs, and I decided, okay, I'm going to focus just on real estate, because that's really what I want to do. It's always what I've wanted to do. So I focused on real estate. And at that time I had actually started Airbnb-ing parts of my house, because, I kind of got tired of the whole roommate thing. And so I figured out how to kind of split up my house into different units. So it became kind of like a multi-unit. And I actually was able to Airbnb different parts of those. And I built a garage, I turned my garage into a cottage. And so that was a development process. Like, I essentially developed a new construction project just in my own backyard. And then I kind of became an Airbnb entrepreneur by accident. It was just the thing that ended up making the best consistent income. And I just stuck with it. And Airbnbs are just such a great way for any individual who's maybe doesn't have a lot of capital. There's a lot of ways to get started in the space, but it is just an amazing way to start building that passive income, or semi-passive income, as I call it. So I built up an Airbnb portfolio. It grew to 7 units. And at that point, it actually more than replaced my corporate income. But it was going really well. although I wanted to be more diversified, I didn't want all of my income to rely on this one portfolio. And so that's when I started Lux Capital Investment Group, which is the firm that, one of my main my main businesses that I run right now. Lux Capital Investment Group, it's a private equity firm. And so we help investors access high quality real estate deals so they can be limited partners in. And, we're looking at apartment buildings, short-term rentals, self-storage, mobile home parks, industrial. And so I'm focused on recession resilient asset classes and downside protection, because I don't like to lose money, and I know nobody else wants to either. So that's one of our core tenets is capital preservation. But then we're also focused on getting those strong returns over time and helping people really snowball their wealth.
Very nice.
Excellent. Yeah.
Very nice. Very cool. So you touched on a funny story in that your boss told you basically you're an indentured servant. So
yeah.
Anything else you can share that happened to you along the way?
Yeah. Well, I think that I think that people would sometimes look at me as I was building my wealth. And I think I kind of had a reputation for being, let's say, scrappy. And I think, for example, like I did have roommates until my mid 30s. I had roommates. And I mean, they were people that I, loved and adored and was happy to have them. But it's kind of a long time to have roommates, right? Yeah. But the key is that I was living below my means while I was growing my investments. And at some point I did decide, okay, I'm ready to not have roommates anymore. But I was actually really totally content with my situation. I never bought a new car. I mean, I drove an old car. I actually just had to say goodbye to my old car, Tomato. But that was another thing about living below my means was, people would make fun of me for my, for Tomato, because she would, sometimes she would have pieces fall off of her, and there would be sometimes inconvenient incidents that would happen. And but for the most part, I just loved my car, and I never really saw her as other people saw her. I just saw her as my trusty steed, and I didn't really feel the need to have any sort of flashy automobile, anything like that. I mean, I'm not in this game for owning expensive items or cars or houses, or looking flashy or living a flashy lifestyle. I'm just in it for what matters to me, right? And my priorities are, I like to travel. I want to be in control of my own time and schedule, and I want to make an impact, right? Like for me, that's so important, is having a positive impact on other people's lives.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah. But, I think that a lot of people end up experiencing lifestyle creep. Have you heard of that term?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Where it's like, you're kind of grinding away, and then you just start spending a little bit more money, and you kind of experience this lifestyle creep where all of a sudden you're like, oh gosh, but I could never get rid of my cleaner or my meal service or whatever it is, my car and my space in my house. And you get into this mindset of what you really need, right? And I think it's hard to walk back from that, especially later in life, once you have a family and once you have, a big house and things like that. It's hard to walk back from that. But I do encourage people to try to think about ways that they can really minimize their lifestyle and start building up that cash flow, because it's such an important step towards building wealth, right?
Right. We always talk about that too. I mean, like to your point, people are, regardless how it looks on the outside, you can be broke at just different levels. You'd be broke at making $20,000 a year. You could be broke at making $500,000 a year if your bills are $500,000 a year. That was one of the key tenets of The Millionaire Next Door. They talked about, the two lifestyles. There was the guy that owned the junkyard, made $400,000. The guy that was the attorney made $400,000, but the guy that made the attorney had to live in the nicest neighborhood, had to have the newest cars. It was all part of the package of who you were. Right. And it said, but, if their jobs, but income's ended tomorrow, one guy could live about 3 months, the other guy could live indefinitely. So, I mean, there was real levels of wealth, even though one had show in the outside world would all guess that was the wealthiest person, but it was the other guy that was living below his means and just making smart financial decisions versus just outward appearances.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think that's another thing is not, like, to your point, not being dependent on an employer for your income, right?
Right.
To be in control of my own income streams and know that my financial future is up to me and not dependent on whether a company is growing or shrinking or what my boss, thinks, or just it doesn't depend on somebody else. It depends on me. And I know that I can continue to adapt and pivot so that, I can always be in control of my own schedule and not, like you said, have real wealth.
Mm-hmm. But so what was a deciding factor for you needing to change jobs? It sounds like a lot of it was the independence, the control of your own time, the ability to, set your schedule and things you really enjoyed. Was there any one particular point you decided you had to make a switch, or was kind of always sound like it was in the back of your mind? You knew real estate from your childhood and your parents owning it. And was it kind of always a parallel path, or?
So why did I choose real estate specifically, or what was the main reason for?
You were leaving the corporate job
Yeah.
to the new path.
Bill, like, to be honest, for me, and this might not ring true for other people or for all other people, but for me, I just was not my best self in the corporate environment. Like, I was not happy. Mm-hmm. I was not thriving. And I really felt, when I was on my travels and I was figuring out, what am I going to do next? Am I going to get another job? Am I going to try to switch fields because I was more interested in development? Or am I going to be an entrepreneur? And I just decided that, if there was ever going to be a time in my life where I could try to be an entrepreneur, this was it, because I was spending so little money. I didn't have any obligations that, like, I didn't have kids to worry about. I just felt like it's now or never. And if I don't try now, I'm just going to get stuck in another job and that lifestyle creep's going to come back in. Right. And I just was desperate. There was a certain amount of desperation, and not in a bad way, but just I used it to drive me, really. And I think that's another thing that I think listeners and everybody should really figure out is negative emotions, or, hard emotions don't have to be negative. You can use pain to drive you towards your goals, right? And so I think harnessing your emotions in that way, and I did it kind of subconsciously at the time, but now I try to be more conscious about how I work with my emotions to help me drive towards my goals.
Very nice.
Good. Yeah.
So I think for me, it was really just out of self-preservation, deciding to be an entrepreneur. I know other people tend to get comfortable, and I can relate to that, right? I can relate to getting comfortable in your job. In fact, I was pretty comfortable in my job, even though I wasn't actually thriving on the inside. It wasn't actually until I disconnected and went traveling and was able to kind of let everything sort of fall away that I started to realize how unhappy I was going to the office. Like, it really wasn't until I started to experience that freedom of, I get to do whatever I want every single day. I'm entirely in charge of my life. I don't have to be anywhere or do anything, for the most part. And once I really experienced that, I was never going back.
Right.
That's awesome.
That's excellent. Yeah.
Suja, as you, maybe it's along the way when you were kind of starting the Airbnb thing, and then you expanded, can you talk about some obstacles you had to overcome?
Oh gosh, absolutely. Well, one obstacle that I had to deal with was my neighbors. My neighbors did not really, at first they didn't really like necessarily me having roommates. I guess I kind of live in, I don't know if it's an uppity neighborhood or it's just a neighborhood where people kind of felt like they could tell me what to do with my property. But in any case, I had to deal with my neighbors, right? And that was a bit of a growing experience for me because I didn't really like disappointing people. And I was worried that the decisions that I made, they weren't going to be happy with still. And so instead I would just avoid, right? I would avoid kind of talking to them unless I have to. But then when I was getting my garage built into a cottage, there's like this whole neighborhood notice thing. And so your neighbors get notified of your construction, and then they get a chance to comment because I live in a historic district. And I was still into avoiding at that point, but I got a tip from a person who manages Airbnbs, and she helped me understand. She's like, oh yeah, no, you just sweeten them up with like, gifts and cards, and, you say you're available for anything. And it just made me realize that like, oh, okay, like I just need to be present for them and address their concerns in the ways that I can. And if I show that I'm present and that I care and that I'm making an effort, then they'll be more understanding of, what is happening. And there are things that I actually can address that will make a difference and don't disrupt my business activities. And so once I kind of moved from that mindset of avoiding the conflict to just meeting my neighbors, and building a relationship and being open to their feedback and trying to address what I could address, things just really improved. So that was one thing that was like, it was just emotionally challenging for me, but I did get through it. Another thing was just how long it takes, getting permits to build new construction in a historic district in Portland, Oregon is very challenging. It took me 3 years to build my garage. And so, from the time I decided I wanted to do it till the time it was actually done. So it's just a long time, you have to just kind of stay the course and keep the vision alive. And, actually during this time, I got kind of like, it was just taking so long that I ended up deciding I want to go back, just to go back to work, because I was like, oh gosh, I'm just tired of kind of living just like, right at my means. And I know the money's coming and building, but I'm just kind of tired. And so I went back and I got a job. I tried to switch careers. It's actually pretty hard to make a lateral move, or get paid the same amount of money. I was prepared to take a pay cut, but in any case, I still just got hired for my same old job that I was doing before, which is underwriting. And that was good in some ways. It was good because it allowed me to get a home equity line of credit, and it helped me, which I needed, right? My home had appreciated so much, but I couldn't access the money in it, the equity in it. So I got a home equity line of credit, and I bought another property. During that time, I brought a fourplex, which I needed, my W-2 income to purchase that. At least that's how I did it. And, believe it or not, I actually didn't really like my job. And even though I could do well at it, I was already halfway towards being an entrepreneur, and my heart just wasn't in it. And my boss was, he was a very demanding boss. And it was a position that I had probably, I would have really needed to apply myself for. So actually 9 months later, I got fired, which was a big slap in the face, but it was also the best gift in the world. So kind of like in 2013, when everything went wrong, I was just it took me a while to process it, but I'm so grateful for that, because otherwise I would have felt like I should stay in the job because I owe it to my boss and I owe it to my team. And the reality is that I wasn't happy. And, there's probably someone who would try a lot harder at that job. And also, I was already halfway to being an entrepreneur. And so if I was to stay at that job, it would have delayed my growth as an entrepreneur even more. So even though it was a difficult thing that happened, I again focused on controlling my emotions, right? Like, so leveraging them, like the pain of being, I was a class, I got A grades. I went to, Northwestern and Carnegie Mellon. I went to I was a high performing student. And so performing well at work was something that I just thought was part of my identity. But I knew that so much of success is mindset, 80%, right? And we have to use whatever happens in our life to help propel us forward. So I very much focused on how do I deal with the hardship of, and like the mental challenges of being fired. And how do I use that to propel me towards what it is that I really want, right? Because it's not like what I really wanted was to succeed in that job. In fact, that was the opposite of what I wanted. So instead, I was like, okay, no, I'm going to drive this forward. And it gave me an urgency. I was like, I don't have time to waste, right? Like, this has happened, and now I'm going to use that as rocket fuel to help me propel towards being an entrepreneur. So that's when I started Lux Capital, and I built my hotel, which is a fourplex, but it's a very, very high cash flowing hotel, and went through the permitting process. And anyways, I just used that negative experience to drive me forward.
That's great.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah. So maybe I know you touched on the initial house you did the 5x return on, but maybe like the new one with the hotel you just mentioned. Was that one of your first victories that's really cemented the idea that you're on the right path as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So the first thing that I did was the fourplex was kind of a little bit later on in the process.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the first one was just taking my basement unit and turning it into an Airbnb. That's the most profitable thing I've ever done in my entire career, because I spent maybe $5,000 on it over the course of, just building a kitchen, like a kitchenette, and putting an egress window in, and just painting and stuff like that, and decor. And that property makes at least $30,000 a year just in pure profit. And so it's just like, such a great income stream. And literally it cost me so little money. Right. And I don't clean it anymore. I started out cleaning it. So once that happened, then I was like, oh, I want more of that, And so then I turned my master bedroom, which has a door to the backyard, into another rental. And it was a short-term rental at first. And we built a bathroom and a kitchenette again. And because my house was so big, and I didn't need all of that house. Right. But I also didn't want to have roommates. So that one, similarly, I spent a little bit more on it because we had to build more. We had to do more building there, but still it was very low cost. Like probably maybe I spent like $15,000 on it, not a lot of money for a similar income stream. And then the last one was the cottage at my house. Again, I built that. That cost me probably about $125,000 to build. And I would say it has a 3-year payback period. So making about $40,000 a year. But then once those 3 years are up, which they now are, then it's just, a straight income stream of, another $40,000. And that's when I then purchased the fourplex. And that also took time, like in my mind, when I started a project, it was like the vision that I wanted it to be done. It was already done, right? But I actually had to go through the motions of getting it done to actually get it done. So with the fourplex, I had to go through this permitting process, changing it from a long-term rental to a short-term rental use so I could get a hotel permit. COVID was happening in the middle of that, so it kind of delayed things, but that also took like 3 years to turn it into a hotel. But now, I still was able to operate it as an Airbnb in the meantime, but now I have like the special advantage of being, really like, now that regulations are really being enforced, I just have a great asset. So, so that one, also throws off, I would say, $75,000 in pure cash flow every year, after all expenses, including the mortgage, et cetera. So, and then it's continuing to grow because, I continue to optimize the properties. Good. So, those were, from a personal standpoint, those were some big wins. But then also, then I started Lux Capital Investment Group. And with that, I'm really helping people learn how to snowball their wealth. And so we're still waiting for some of our deals to exit that we got into earlier on. But, I know that they are all on track. Of course, the market's always changing, but that's the cool thing about commercial real estate is that it's not so volatile. So if you can make it through those harder times, then, we all know that real estate's eventually going to go up and there'll be an opportune time to sell.
Right. That's pretty amazing. Like I said, just on your primary residence, you're able to generate $100,000 of income. Those 3 additional units you could rent out. And then they said in the fourplex, another 75. So, 2 properties, 175,000 a year coming in was I'm sure felt like a nice comfort base you had between those first 2 properties.
Yeah, exactly.
Income. Yeah.
Very high cash flow, right? And you don't have to wait. Like it's pretty much there once you get the units up and running. So Airbnb is really, really awesome for that. And yeah, I highly recommend it. And then, I don't even have a mortgage, right? Because I still live at that house. And so, so I don't have actually living costs beyond that. Like the Airbnb just literally pays for it. So yeah, it's a really good situation. I recommend that people, think about how they can actually do it for themselves.
Very nice.
That's excellent. Yeah.
So Suja, from somewhere in your time with Lux Capital and after you created that company, is there something funny you can share along the way?
I don't know if this is funny per se, but what I would say is that, I was nervous, right, to put myself out there. And I was nervous to say like, okay, this is who I'm going to be in the world. I'm going to be somebody who talks about real estate. I'm going to be someone who talks about money. I'm going to be someone who is a salesperson, inviting people into my deals. That was a very challenging shift, I think, for me to make, because I wasn't used to having that kind of persona in the world. And I think that it kind of, you're going to lose some people along the way. Like some people are going to be like, oh, that's what she's about now. And, and I think people say this oftentimes about entrepreneurship, right? That you're going to lose people along the way. And I think that probably has happened for me. But at the same time, you would end up attracting the people who are kind of resonating with what it is you're putting out into the world. And you end up building more relationships and kind of deeper relationships that are more aligned with what really matters to me, because I do believe in it, right? Like I do believe in investing in real estate. I believe in getting control of your own life and having a secure income stream that isn't dependent on employer. These are all things that I really believe in. And it's okay for me to just be all about that. And I will attract the people who care about that as well. And it's been a really interesting experience to kind of just let that unfold the way it's going to unfold. And just focus on the positives and focus on that positive energy and where there is that kind of reciprocal resonant energy.
Very nice. That's great. Well, where are you today in your journey with Lux Capital as you expand? You said you were looking into multiple different assets in the commercial real estate space. Where do you kind of see it growing, or are you just waiting to see how the market gives you as far as what's best opportunities?
Oh, well, yeah. So I focus on what I consider to be recession resilient asset classes. We are about a dozen deals deep in it. We have about a dozen deals that we are in, and they span multifamily, value add. They span build to rent, which is brand new construction, townhomes that are for rent, short-term rentals. So we have a short-term rental fund that we are investing in, and self-storage. We have a number of self-storage units and self-storage portfolios that we're in. And we will be doing mobile home parks and industrial next year. So looking at those opportunities. And what I would say is that, as I mentioned before, my main focus is capital preservation, right? Like as Warren Buffett said, the number one rule of investing is don't lose money. Yeah. And the number two rule is don't forget rule number one. And that is so important if you just look at the math, right? Like if you end up losing money, it's going to be really hard to recover from that. So number one is capital preservation. And that is why I'm focused on these particular asset classes, right? Like I will be very hesitant about getting into, certain types of retail, like office, for example, obviously very hesitant about that, and other types of retail that I feel like are just not more volatile. And so I'm focused on recession resilient asset classes, and I'm focused on conservative underwriting. I come from an institutional background, so we really did have to dot every I and cross every T, for 100 pages. So, and it was very rigorous, and that's kind of my background, and that's what I bring to the table as far as the underwriting of our deals is concerned. And and also just, you got to do a gut check, right? So that's one thing that I offer for my investors is making sure that, it's hard when you're running a full-time career, you're really busy with your own stuff to like really get to know a new space, which is the real estate space. How do you know who to trust? How do you know where to put your money? And that's where I come in, right? Like I'm spending a lot of my time networking, learning about deals, seeing what's out there, and finding the best deals to put our money into. And I invest in every deal. My parents invest in every deal. My partner invests. I'm fully invested in all of these deals, and I want my network to be a part of that as well. So that is kind of what I bring to the table, is being able to offer a diversified set of offerings across different asset classes, different operators, different geographies, so that people can have a diversified real estate portfolio.
Nice. Great. Yeah. Nice.
Suja, as you think about personally how you operate, or perhaps through Lux Capital, is there something that you can do to give back that you can share and talk about, briefly mention?
Yeah. So we actually currently are donating. With every deal that we close, we're donating $1,000 to a an organization here in Portland that helps people transition from living on the streets to living kind of a more stable lifestyle. So recovery from addiction and just getting a job and being able to kind of move up in the world. So we donate every single time we do a deal. And in addition to that, we're looking to grow that over time, right? So as the amount of money we raise and manage grows, we'll be increasing our donations. And giving back is one of the privileges of being proficient in a space like this. If you can succeed in the real estate space, you're going to do really well. And that's one of the reasons why I am so drawn to it, right? My mom used to tell me, I used to want to do be a social worker and do jobs that would do good in the world. And my mom would always say, well, don't you just want to make more money and then you can give to those causes? And I would just kind of blow her up and be like, no, I'm going to go be a social worker. And I did that for a while. And then that was kind of hard, to not have a lot of money and to not have a lot of options in terms of where you live and all this stuff. And so I eventually took my mom's advice and I decided I was going to, pursue some level of financial wealth, obviously more focused on lifestyle than actually just accumulating a pile of money. But when you do accumulate a pile of money, you can, you have more capacity to donate. And so I'm definitely focused on that. And I think that anybody in this space and many people in the space are, right? Because when you focus on giving, givers gain, then, the positive feedback cycle just continues.
Nice.
Right. That's great. Was there something you've recently implemented in your business that's allowed you to scale?
Well, having a virtual assistant has really helped. Managing the virtual assistant, that takes extra time, but it is so worth it, right? Because it's just like an extra set of hands that can just do a lot of routine tasks that we have routine tasks when I'm doing my podcast or creating materials, graphics, video. There's a lot of things that virtual assistants can do. Having copywriting and things like that are a little bit harder to get depending on, who your virtual assistant is. But, we all need to replace ourselves, right? And if we can do that in an affordable way, I don't necessarily want to have employees, but having a virtual assistant is a really nice middle ground of having extra set of hands.
Right. Excellent.
Very nice. Suja, what advice would you share with somebody who's considering making a path change?
Who's considering making a what?
A path change, changing what they do. Change. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that you've got to feel the pain. You've got to feel the pain of where you are, because so much of us feel pretty comfortable in what we're doing. I felt comfortable working as an underwriter, and I don't know that I would have left that job if I didn't get laid off. And I think I was lucky because the pain was handed to me. But if you're not so lucky and you just are in a stable, what you consider a stable situation, I would say you got to use, not just, we want to leverage both the pain of what we don't want and also the joy of what we do want, right? So if you can just sort of really try to get crystal clear on what it is that you wish was different about your life. And, it's okay. We all just not put too many attachments to it. Just use this time to just get clear on what it is that you wish was different, and also get clear on what it is that you wish could be. And then don't limit yourself, right? You have to say, this is possible. It's possible for me to have a better life. It's possible for me to be happier. It's possible for me to have more of what I want in this world and still accomplish what I want and still live by my values. And I think that mastering our emotions is key to being able to get out of a comfort zone and push yourself towards what it is you really want.
Yep. Well said.
What's the best way for the listeners to be able to reach you and find out more about what Lux Capital and yourself are up to?
Absolutely. So you can reach out on my website, luxe-cap.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Suja Shyam. That's Suja, last name Shyam as in Mary. And I would be more than happy to talk to anybody about the path change that they want to make and brainstorm with them about how they can make that happen. So please reach out.
That's great. And we'll add those in the show notes below. Well, Suja, we really appreciated the conversation we had today, and we wish you continued success.
Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you so much, Richard. Great to be here, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Suja. Appreciate you being on. We'd also like to thank our guests. Please continue to give us a 5-star rating so we can bring you more great content like today's show with Suja Shyam. And we'll also like to remind everybody of a couple things that Park Capital Partners has going. First of all, we have the Park Capital Partners Value Add Fund, which is a 506c fund open to accredited investors. And we also have the Park Capital Partners Foundation, which is a 501(c) nonprofit that Bill and I created. And the way that works briefly is that, first of all the money donated, it goes to do its best work, which is to help others. And the reason for that is because Park Capital Partners funds the operations of the foundation. Secondly, we give corporately. Third, we give personally. And when investors invest with us, we also make a donation to honor that investor to a gift to a list from a list of 15 pre-approved charities that the investors can pick which ones they care about most. So please check us out and reach out to us. ParkCapitalPartnersLLC.com. Thanks for joining, folks. And remember, the road less traveled may be calling you. We recommend that you listen and take action. Thanks for joining.